I echo what Barbara said last week in this pulpit, which is, it is a humbling privilege to stand here where Sunday by Sunday our pastor Robin preaches with such conviction, giving us the truth and giving us the tools for hope. And both are so needed in this day. So many, many thanks to Robin for the invitation to be here and for all that she does for all of us. Did you hear that line in the scripture? There was a famine in the land. How many times might those simple but chilling words have been said in world history? The Hebrew people ended up in Egypt, the book of Genesis tells us, because during the time of Joseph there was a famine in the land. In the 1840s, 1.5 million Irish men, women, and children, including, I suspect, the ancestors of some of the folks in this room, fled their island nation when the potato crop repeatedly failed, leading to the choice between exile or starvation. There was a famine in the land. About that same time, tens of thousands of Chinese and Japanese left their homelands and families where hunger was their constant companion to work the sugar plantations in Hawaii because there was a famine in the land. In the 1930s, 2.5 million Americans watched their farms blow away as 650 million tons of topsoil were scoured from farms across the Great Plains, leaving farmers little choice if they wanted to feed their children than to hit the road in beat-up cars, making their way to California, where they were met with scorn and derision and derisively called Okies. There was a famine in the land. Even today, those words are tragically accurate in Somalia and the South Sudan and Eastern Africa, and even in too many parts of our own country, where 1 in 4 children are undernourished. And so very often, two things almost invariably accompany a famine in the land: hopelessness and fear. The hopelessness comes in the lives of those who have too little to eat, who cannot find meaningful work, who know the unrivaled pain of watching their children go hungry. Mark Mathabane's autobiography, Kaffir Boy, tells of his growing up in 1960s apartheid South Africa, and he says this about that kind of hunger, quote, "I came to accept hunger as my constant companion. It filled me with hopelessness, anxiety, selfishness, and a cynical attitude towards people. And I felt that the dream of my bright future had deserted me." But along with the hopelessness of those who are hungry comes the fearfulness of those who face them. Pharaoh feared the growing numbers of Hebrew people, and so he enslaved them. The mendacious men who governed the Republic of Hawaii, after cynically engineering a coup that overthrew the queen, feared those Chinese and Japanese immigrants so much that they made it illegal for their children to go to school or to learn to read and write. Too many stories from the 1930s in America tell of folks in small towns on the West Coast terrorizing those camps of those Dust Bowl refugees. For you see, too often when there is a famine in the land, there is also a famine of courage and civility, a famine of empathy, a famine of seeing your hurting neighbor as someone to be helped. Too often, such hard times, whether it's famine or depression or disaster or social upheaval, leads instead to seeing the other, Hebrews, Chinese, Japanese, Okies, and gays, and lesbians, and transgender, and women, and persons of color, as people to be feared and repressed and demonized. Our scripture today is the story of Ruth and Naomi. Its most memorable lines, "Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God," we often associate with wedding vows. But these lines are actually not about weddings at all. No, they are said by a daughter-in-law to her mother-in-law. The mother-in-law is Naomi, and the daughter-in-law is Ruth. To make a long story short, Naomi is a Jew from Bethlehem whose husband had taken her and their 2 sons to the country of Moab to seek work and food. Their sons then marry Moabite women. But tragedy strikes when Naomi's husband dies, and then a few years later, both of her sons also die. Naomi then decides to return to Bethlehem, back to the familiarity of family and friends, and she releases her 2 daughters-in-law from their obligation to stay with her. The one daughter-in-law, Orpah, tearfully accepts Naomi's release and goes back to her Moabite family to restart her life anew. But Ruth says no, with those beautiful words, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." And so Naomi, this Hebrew woman, and her daughter-in-law, this Moabite woman, go to Bethlehem. There, Ruth makes it known eventually to a man named Boaz that she finds him attractive. The feeling is mutual, and soon Ruth and Boaz are married. But it wasn't just physical attraction. No, it was the attraction of Ruth's integrity and ethics and her loving spirit. For did you hear what Boaz said to Ruth? "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your native land and came to a people that you did not know before." It's a lovely story, isn't it? Tragic, but also lovely. But you may wonder, why is it in the Bible? Why did our Jewish forebears affirm this as scripture, worthy of having something to teach us? Well, it goes back to what too often happens when change in a society is happening, be it famine or some other upheaval. And it's a choice between fearfulness and faithfulness. You see, as Barbara Blaisdell also discussed with us a few months ago, the book of Ruth was written at the same time as the prophets Ezra and Nehemiah were calling for patriotic purity. It was a time of upheaval, a time when Israel faced what we might call the challenge of multiculturalism. Too many leaders worried about how many new people, how many outsiders, how many foreigners Israel could take without losing its identity. They worried about all those people who were different. These prophets therefore decided that Jews could no longer marry foreigners for fear of watering down the tradition and for fear of these new people coming to replace them. Here's the thing. The Bible is not simply a book of verses without a context. No, often it is actually a conversation between competing ideas. And the wisdom of our forebearers is that both sets of ideas are often preserved. That's what happened here. The story of Ruth was preserved and included along with the anxious and exclusionary decrees of Ezra and Nehemiah. For you see, the story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz offers an opposing view, an appeal not for purity, but for inclusion. The book of Ruth offers a counter view by telling the story of a foreigner, a pagan, one who is one of those other people, one who is different, but who turns out to be a wonderful gift to the community. I said earlier that Boaz was attracted to Ruth because of her loyalty, her integrity, her ethics. But there's more. When Naomi told Ruth and Orpah that they should go back to their mother's homes, do you remember what Naomi said to them? She thanked them for having dealt so very kindly with her. But the word kindly is a really wimpy translation here of what in the Old Testament is a very powerful word. It's the word hesed. Get to do your back of your throat like you're coughing. Hesed. My favorite preacher, Barbara Blaisdell, says this of that word. Hesed is tenacious love. It is the word for stubborn, ever-present, won't go away no matter what you do, kindness and mercy. Naomi recognizes that these two young women have been tenaciously, stubbornly loving, and that their love, like all human love, originates with God. That's finally what Boaz saw in Ruth, that no matter that she was a foreigner, one who was different, one who was supposed to be a person to be feared, well, God tears down our fences and overturns our walls with the reminder that God's love works in ways that we dare not fearfully fence off through the very people whom we might try to write off. And that, my friends, is our reminder too. The trajectory and the witness of the Bible is always to ever widening the circle, tearing down the fences, facing down every famine of fearfulness with love, with hesed. And while not one of us should ever claim that our country is the same thing as our faith can and should nonetheless inform how we act as citizens. What do I mean? Well, for Ezra and Nehemiah, it was the Moabites who were the other, the enemy, the ones who were different. For us, in our own era of fearfulness and upheaval, for too many people, those others whom we are somehow supposed to fear are the Muslims, or transgender folks, or immigrants, or women, or LGBTQ folks, or those who dress differently, talk differently, or those who believe in science rather than the wisdom of Facebook and Fox News. The story of Ruth reminds us that the love of God and the goodness of God knows no single nationality, no single religion, no single style of life, no single belief system, no one gender expression or sexuality, and that those who are other have wonderful contributions to make to our shared civic life. Amidst the challenges facing our country right now, we have a chance. We have a chance. We can respond fearfully, seeking to be latter-day Ezras and Nehemiahs, putting up more fences, presuming the worst about our fellow citizens, denying that racism is still too much of a part of our shared life together, slandering and abusing those who are different, and rewarding those who feed on this famine of fecklessness and inflame under the color of the law that biases and bigotries which threaten to hurt the most vulnerable. Or we can follow the way of Naomi and Boaz, recognizing that God's hesed is bigger than our bigotries, God's goodness more dominating than our demagogueries, and that God's love is not owned by us and is to be found in people of goodwill of every ethnicity, every orientation, every political party, every class, every race, every religion, Moabites and Muslims, Christians and Jews, immigrant and native-born, people of every faith and no faith, those of every sexual orientation, male and female, Republican and Democrat. The late Fred Rogers once wrote this, quote, "For me, as for all children, the world could seem a very scary place to live. But there was always something that my mother did that I've always remembered. Always look for the helpers," she said. "There's always someone trying to help." My friends, those helpers are indeed always there in times of upheaval, propelled by God's hesed, seeking to make this community, this country, this world a better place, a place of safety and plenty for all, a place more animated by Ruth and Boaz and less by Ezra and Nehemiah, a place where every child is cared for, where no elderly person ever again chooses between medicine and food, where no gay or transgender teenager ever contemplates suicide, where truly we can, as a nation, in the mighty words of Martin Luther King, live out the true meaning of our creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. To do so, it will take helpers indeed. It will take Ruths and Boazes and Naomis who recognize God's love is always at work in unexpected ways and unexpected places and unexpected people. God will not give up, and we dare not either. I want to be one of those helpers. I want our church to continue to be one of those helpers. Shall we? Shall we?